Obviously, many people are going to be having massive consumption of alcohol pre-night, pre-game, during the game, post-game. It's not helping in terms of your hydration, and it dramatically alters your cognitive ability to make good decisions for yourself. Seeking shade instead of sun, making sure you're staying hydrated, making all the good decisions are just much less likely to happen if you're intoxicated.
In there.
Yeah.
There's really no two ways about it. North America is hot in the summer. First thing is, this will be the hottest World Cup ever. And that includes Qatar, because of course that tournament was done in the winter. And temperatures did get up to about 90 degrees Fahrenheit. And a quick apology to listeners who are Celsius users, but I will be sticking to Fahrenheit in this episode for consistency. The American College of Sports Medicine recommends that athletic activity should stop above 82 degrees Fahrenheit. Multiple World Cup stadiums will get way hotter than that consistently. So Dallas may have 37 days hotter than 95 degrees this summer. Houston, 28 days. I mean, just looking at the temperature for this weekend in Dallas and Houston, it's going to be 93 in Dallas, it's going to be 90 in Houston, and we're at the end of May. Now, thankfully, a handful of these stadiums, not even a handful, Dallas, Houston, Atlanta, are air conditioned. They have retractable roofs, so they're essentially indoor and air conditioned. And so what FIFA has done, to its credit, has put many of those afternoon matches in those stadiums. And then some of the kind of morning matches and late night matches will be in West Coast cities, some of the cooler cities. But there are anomalies. France versus Senegal is going to be at the 3 p.m. slot in New York, New Jersey. The very opening match of the tournament, Mexico versus South Africa, will be in Mexico City at 2 p.m. local time. These are stadiums without air conditioning. And don't forget that even those stadiums, Atlanta, Houston, Dallas, there's going to be a lot of outdoor time for fans lining up to get in. So funnily enough, it's some of those cities you don't expect that are going to have the most extreme heat burden this summer. There was a recent ranking of World Cup stadiums based on their heat stress. In the top 10 were all the Mexican stadiums, but also Philly, Boston, New Jersey, which you think of being less hot than the South. But like I said, the southern stadiums are air conditioned. These northeastern cities are wide open, and they also have this thing called the urban heat island effect, whereby cities often add 10 degrees Fahrenheit to the heat stress because things like concrete pavement absorbs heat. So many people living in dense areas with buildings trapping heat, lack of shading, lack of vegetation that can deflect heat. And also a shout out to Arrowhead Stadium in Kansas City, which will be the hottest American stadium. And that's because it's a bowl. So it's just completely exposed to heat. It has no breeze effect whatsoever. It's just like an open air bowl. And so in this ranking, it is the number one US city for heat stress. There are some things that will be done. So FIFA is going to implement a water break in each half at the 25-minute mark in each half. They haven't done things like extend halftime or increase number of substitutes, which were being called for. I think heat is going to be one of the biggest factors in this World Cup, especially among players playing in England and Germany and places like that where they're just not used to heat. I wanted to find out a little bit more about not just what the heat stresses are, but what athletes are actually doing to prep for these temperatures. So I spoke to Douglas Casa, who is the CEO of the Corey Stringer Institute at the University of Connecticut. And that is an institute that does research and advocacy and consultation around performance and safety enhancements for athletes, among other trades. And Douglas has worked with multiple teams in multiple different sports around enhancing performance and safety in heat, including the Portugal national team in 2014 and the US women's national team as well. So here's my chat with Doug Casa. Yeah, Doug, great to have you here. Thanks for coming on.
Of course. Glad to be here.
Why don't you tell us just a little bit about yourself and your role at the Corey Stringer Institute?
Sure. Yeah. My name is Douglas Casa. I'm a Board of Trustees Distinguished Professor in the Department of Kinesiology here at the University of Connecticut, and I've been a professor here since 1999. As many of your audience will remember, Corey Stringer was an NFL football player who played for the Minnesota Vikings, all pro offensive lineman. Very sadly, in August 1st, 2001, he died from an exertional heat stroke that happened in the practice the day before. He's the only NFL player to die during a practice conditioning session or game in like the 110-year history of the NFL. And for the 8 years that transpired after his death, I served as an expert witness on many court cases, in service of his 3-year-old son at the time and his widow. In 2009, Commissioner Goodell of the NFL and Kelsey Stringer, his widow, asked if we'd want to host a lasting legacy here for Corey. We opened our doors in April 23rd, 2010, and we focus on safety and performance issues for athletes, warfighters, and laborers. And we have kind of a multi-pronged approach. We have public health initiatives, but we have a lot of very intense laboratory research we do here at the University of Connecticut in our heat labs, where we can modify the temperature, control the temperature, humidity, radiant sun, altitude, and 3 different environmental chambers we have here that we do research for Department of Defense, for different companies, athletic situations, anything to try to enhance performance in the heat, but also enhance safety issues when you have to do intense exercise in the heat. One additional item your listeners will probably find interesting, we just opened our first satellite heat lab at the University of North Florida in Jacksonville, because we wanted to be, around laborers, athletes, warfighters who are in the heat all day, every day. And we felt like that was a great opportunity, and they were willing to partner with us. So they have 2 new faculty members there, and the heat lab opens May 18th.
And just having read a little bit about you, is it true that you had your own personal connection with heat stroke? What happened to you?
Yes, in August 8th, 1985, I was running in the Empire State Games in upstate New York as a kind of a summer Olympic sports festival they'd had for many, many years in New York, where they have all the different Olympic events. And I had long wanted to qualify in the track and field division to represent Long Island at the Empire State Games. It's very competitive because only the top 2 in each track event make it. And I finally made it in my last opportunity going into my senior year in the 10K race. But unfortunately, they had the wisdom of starting the 10K race late morning on August 8th, so it was extremely hot out. And on the very final lap with 200 meters to go, after running 24 and a half laps, I collapsed. I got back up, I ran the turn, and then with about 80 meters to go, I collapsed again, and then I was unconscious for the next few hours. And was super fortunate that Ken Scriber was the athletic trainer volunteering that day, and he knew it was a heat stroke right away and started aggressive cooling. But then I was also super fortunate that the emergency room physician at Millard Fillmore Hospital in Buffalo had a lot of experience treating heat strokes in his previous career in the military. And he put me in an ice water immersion bath in a hospital in 1985, which definitely was a key factor in 1, saving my life, and 2, surviving basically without incident so that I could have a healthful recovery.
I think a lot of people don't know, or maybe there's more awareness now, but I think a lot of people don't know how dangerous heat can be. Biologically, I suppose, scientifically, what happens to a person? What does it do to a person when they're exposed to an unsafe amount of heat?
Yeah, that's good. I'm happy you brought that up, actually. I'm going to first go macro, and my answer here is heat is the biggest environmental cause of death in America every year. And if you combine hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, forest fires, tsunamis, any possible thing, if you add all of the deaths together, it doesn't equal the heat deaths in a year. So it is a huge issue, probably underrepresented in terms of the things that we could do to protect ourselves and prevent it from happening. And remember, this is happening for laborers, for athletes, for warfighters, but also just for the general population. So that gets to the second part of your comment, is there's 2 types of heat stroke. One is called classical heat stroke, and one's called exertional heat stroke. So exertional heat stroke is what happened, like to me running my 10K race during exercise, what happens to soldiers during basic training, a construction worker working in the summertime, things like that. Classic heat stroke happens to, generally speaking, elderly people during heat waves when they're in non-air conditioned, like apartment buildings, and they have comorbidities like heart problems and lung problems, and they can't handle the oppressive heat. It does also, unfortunately, happen sometimes to like infants who are left in parked cars in the summertime. That's also classic heat stroke. So I try to help people understand that classic heat stroke is a failure of the thermoregulatory system. You're just not able to cool yourself. And for the older people, it'll be due to they have comorbidities and they're just not efficient with cooling. And with the younger people, they can't get themselves out of that oppressive situation. Locked there in a car seat in a car and someone left them accidentally in a car. In exertional heat stroke, it's better to understand it as an overwhelming of the thermoregulatory system. You're just generating heat faster than you're able to lose it. So we see it happen very commonly in America. So I'll give you the most common scenarios is linemen in football, in American football. Offensive and defensive linemen are by far the most common position to have heat stroke. They heat up faster, cool down slower. So any activities, conditioning sessions are often they don't consider how linemen heat up faster, and that's why almost all the deaths in football are linemen. But they also cool down slower, so rest breaks need to be longer for linemen as compared to a receiver or running back. We also see it a lot in cross-country running and in track and field long-distance events, again, because it's just you're running so fast, intensity. The key factors that drive your body temperature up is the intensity of the activity, the environmental conditions that you're doing it in, your hydration status, like your body size, like I mentioned before, these big linemen. And then if you have on oppressive clothing or carrying large amounts of equipment, imagine a military person with a big rucksack. All of those things influence the rate of rise of body temperature during intense exercise in the heat, as well as other items.
Okay. Yeah.
So hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah. This is going to be the hottest World Cup ever. I remember back in Qatar, they moved it to the winter because it was going to be so hot. And there wasn't really any talk of that this time, even though most of the country, including the Northeast, gets, really hot in the summer. Was this a mistake? Is it too hot to play a World Cup in this heat?
I don't think it's too hot if you have the proper precautions in place. I was a fan of the Qatar one. I was in Qatar for a week working with medical staff that are getting ready for the track and field world championships and the World Cup. But I don't think it was a mistake. So let's look at this closely. A few of the hottest cities are indoor stadiums. So Dallas, Houston, and Atlanta. So they won't have to deal with the heat at the same level. It'll be ambient conditions, probably low 70s. Obviously, there's going to be cities of major concern for me. Miami is one of them, probably the biggest one. Even the 3 Mexico cities, even though Mexico can be quite hot, 2 of the Mexico cities are at altitude. So the altitude is going to be a little protective when it comes to like the temperature. But obviously you have separate issues to think about when you're at altitude, which we can talk about separately. But then obviously there's other cities that have big concern, like you mentioned. Philadelphia, Boston, New York, just depending on if, it's oppressive, like heat wave time of year, the humidity can be something of a lot of concern. Obviously it can be hot in Los Angeles. Kansas City could certainly see a really big heat issues. So it comes down to like a couple things. What can you do if you are going to have games in these cities? The timing of the games, right? So what time of day? And I don't know the exact timing of all the games, but like Miami and Kansas City would probably be my cities that I would worry about the most. Those would probably be the ones that could have the highest humidity along with high temperatures. Obviously, there could be anomalous things we see in Philly, New York, or Boston. But then also, what are the rules within the game that could protect players? Okay. And I'm going to focus on players for 1 second because we also have to think about spectators. We have to think about volunteers and we have to think about workers. Okay, so there's different people that we have to have controls in place to help them in terms of heat safety. But in terms of the players, I think it's woefully inadequate, the current break that FIFA has when the wet bulb globe temperature exceeds the threshold temperature for modifications for a hydration break. There's a few component parts that lack within it. It's not just a one item. So one, the temperature's too high for the threshold to make changes. Second is it's not long enough. Generally speaking, it's around 3 minutes. And 3 minutes is just not long enough to have a substantial change to your hydration status and body cooling, which we can hit on both of those things separately after. Third item is they have really strict rules, and you probably have seen this when you watch football, is that the players don't leave the pitch. Like they have to stand technically on the field, and then the people helping them are technically on the sideline, right? They're handing them fluid and towels, wet towels. I say, let's stop being so obnoxious about that rule and let them have some sit down on the sideline, and have enough staff who can put freezing cold wet towels over their head, neck, back, upper legs. And I recommend it to be at least 6 minutes long. I think 6 minutes would be enough that we could get a fluid and cooling done that would really make a difference. I can't see why it would matter. We're just talking about an additional 3 minutes. It's not like 6 standalone minutes. So it's 3 more minutes. And from my perspective, it's 3 more minutes of advertising dollars, commercials, right? Because we don't need to watch these players while this is happening. Similarly, when we have knockout stage games, similar concepts could come into play because generally there's a very brief break between the end of the game and the start of the extra time. So we can potentially stretch that out a tiny bit. Also, what is accessible to the athletes pregame and during halftime to help them with cooling? I've been affiliated with some World Cups at the junior level, like U17 and U20s. And again, it was very inadequate what was available at halftime to help with cooling. So, like, are there ice machines? Are there tons of coolers, ice, water, towels, even potentially cold water immersion tubs for our hottest people to jump into during half times? Because you got to remember, the people, obviously pro level soccer, I'm assuming most of your listeners know this, but once you sub out, you can't go back into a game. Very different than youth soccer, high school soccer, even college soccer in America, where you can go back in a game. So these people, generally speaking, if you have, say, 10 field players, it's safe to say 7 or 8 of them might play the whole game. And that means they're running around for 90 minutes in potentially like 100-degree temperature in Miami with 70% humidity. So how efficient are we during their 15-minute halftime? Those players very possibly could be 103 to 104 body temperature at halftime when they run around, potentially covering like 5 miles during that 45 minutes or possibly even more. So that's something we need to consider, like how aggressive are we with helping them with what's being set up at halftime. And then also what's available pregame, because if people want to do some close to normal warm-ups, they're going to also get hot. So some of those cooling strategies could also be used pregame after a warm-up when they're back in the locker room before coming back out onto the field. So there's a lot of different things, but I think the really big thing is the 30-minute mark of each half when we have this supposed hydration break, lowering the threshold, having a longer break, and having more accessibility to the athletes during that time period are 3 things that come to mind.
That all makes sense to me. I think what some football purists would say to you in terms of the water breaks and extending breaks within the halves and extended ads and that kind of thing is that it's ruining the flow of the game, right? I think player welfare is more important than that, but I think FIFA is probably contending with a lot of those forces as well.
I don't doubt that for a second, and I do appreciate that, and I do think it will interrupt slightly with the flow of the game, but also it'll be a better game because the quality of the play will be profoundly better after they've had the cooling and hydration breaks. And even what they do in the first half, the longer break, you'll see the benefit in the second half. And then what they do in the second half, if it's a game that goes to extra time, the quality will be better. They'll be covering more distance each player. There'll be more speed per each sprint, more sprints at higher speeds. There'll be less mistakes. There'll be better agility. Everyone does better when their body temperature is lower and their hydration status is more optimal. So it's just a question of, do you want this continued flow or do you rather have a higher quality game in which the players are safer?
You mentioned that you could explain what cooling actually does to the body. How does it scientifically, I suppose, help you with avoiding heat stroke?
Yeah, well, I'm not too worried about a player having heat stroke during a soccer game. It doesn't happen very often. When we see it in soccer, obviously the American term here, it tends to happen in practices or conditioning sessions. In a game, there's just natural ebbs and flows that thankfully not everyone's running all the time. It can certainly happen. Don't get me wrong. I would not be shocked if we have a midday game in Miami and it's an extreme day. You could have a player have heat stroke. That could happen. This will dramatically help it not happen because if you have the 6 minutes in the middle, I know it's not going to be 6 minutes, but my supposed 6 minutes, and then 15-minute halftime, and you have a 6 minutes again, those natural insertions or breaks dramatically will reduce body temperature. But it's what you do during the breaks. Just passive resting, just as an example, you might have 0.03 or 0.04 degrees Celsius per minute drop passively if you're just sitting in the sun doing nothing. Now, I know that number doesn't mean much to your listeners, but let's just compare it. If you do aggressive whole body cooling, say with cold wet towels over most of your body, it could be 0.15 or 0.16. So it could be 4 times faster. And why this all matters is there's something called volitional exhaustion, where most humans, when they get to a certain body temperature, somewhere, let's say around 104, which is 40 degrees Celsius, that you on your own start to back off on your intensity. And that's a protective mechanism because in America, we don't have 1 million people have heat stroke every single day. And they're out running, they're out jogging, they're out construction, working, farming, because the body has its own safety mechanisms in place, guardrails, so that we don't push beyond it. So generally speaking, when you start creeping towards that temperature, your body is going to not do as much, not try as hard, not have the same ability. Now, there are times we work through it. We know that, right? We have American football players die from heat stroke every single summer. especially at the high school level, because a lot of times there's peer pressure. Coaches are forcing them to do something. They're trying to keep up with their teammates. But if you're left to your own devices, we very rarely kill ourselves from heat stroke. So if someone goes into a halftime and say they're 103.5, their body temperature, if we aggressively cool them during that 15 minutes, they might go back out at 100 or 100.5. So with that delta now, we now have 3 or 4 degrees to work with in the second half before we get near 104 again. But if we go in at 103.5 and we just sit in the locker room for 15 minutes and then come back out, we might just be 103.1 when the second half starts. And now we only have a degree to work with before we get into where our body might not want to try as hard. So it's a little bit of a simplified version, but that's one of the big reasons why we try to keep our body temperature. It's much more ideal for players to like kind of live in that 101 to 103 range during intense exercise in the heat. That's much more the realistic temperatures to have maximal performance. Now, we'll have players for sure in the 103 to 105 range, I'm sure, many times during this World Cup. And that doesn't mean they're having a heat stroke. Heat stroke often is higher than 105 and associated with other items as well. But we have athletes all the time living in the low 104s during intense exercise in the heat, just normally during that activity.
What can and do teams do before the tournament to train for heat? So, for example, England are doing a week or 10 days in South Florida in early June, exactly to train for conditions that they're not used to. What kinds of things might they be doing?
Yeah, so the people from England have some very smart sports scientists being very proactive. But when you do that, you have to be also super careful. If you're going from a cooler environment to the heat, you don't want to do your hardest training in the hottest time of the day. The quality of that workout will not be awesome. So you have to transition to that. So you still do your super hard workouts at the cooler time of the day, but then maybe do some conditioning during that time of day, maybe like 30, 45 minutes of conditioning, and then go into a sauna after. So you got your body temperature up. There's a lot of reasons we have to prep in the heat. So one of them is called heat acclimatization. Your body goes through physiological changes after about 7 to 10 days of exercise in the heat. But generally speaking, that is not triggered maximally unless your body temperature goes over 102 for an hour consecutively. Okay, so you want to get up into that zone and then hold it for like an hour. So you can do it from 30 minutes of exercise, get up over 102, and then sit in a sauna for like 30 minutes. Okay, so you can combine them or you could just do exercise. But you don't want to come straight from England, like you might be leaving, say, 71 degrees, come to 98 degrees. You don't want to do a middle afternoon training session because the people will just bomb. That's just something to keep in mind. But it's very smart that they're doing this preparation. So I'll give a couple of examples. I worked with the Portugal national team in 2014. Before they headed off, we helped give recommendations when they came to New York and used the Jets training facility. One, just getting lined up with Brazil helped with circadian rhythms, right? Because now we're on a similar time zone. Not that all of Brazil is in Eastern time zone, but a portion of it is, and some of the games were. And at most, it was 1 hour on each direction of that when they got there, which was helpful. Much different than being in Portugal. And then second is obviously trying to get people heat acclimatized. The U.S. women's national team, before the Tokyo Olympics in 2020, which became 2021, for the 2 weeks before they had the Olympics, we got their last 2 friendlies scheduled for nearby here at the University of Connecticut. And they came into our heat labs. Each athlete came in like 4 or 5 times before they headed off to Tokyo. So they did their normal training session in the morning with the team. And then at the time we had 2 heat labs, and their athletes would come in and we would do that where they would be over 102 degrees for an hour. And we would put on additional clothing. They'd wear like sweats and sweatshirt and hood. So we'd get up to the temp fast, and then they'd be in t-shirt and shorts above 102 for an hour. So that really helped them when they landed in Tokyo. And there's some fun comments from Megan Rapinoe on Instagram after they got there of how comfortable they felt because they were very prepared when they got there of the oppressive heat of Tokyo. Because similar for the World Cup this year in America, we had predicted in a research article that Tokyo 2020 would be the hottest Summer Olympics in history. We looked at every Olympics from 1896 forward for summer and predicted out on those days that it would be, and it did turn out to be the hottest Summer Olympics in history. Ellie Mayberry was the head of sports science for the U.S. women's national team at the time. She was phenomenal. She was very proactive, and we got involved with them to try to help them prepare. And then even they took an additional step even before they came to us. The cities they were playing in, we found heat labs that were nearby for them. And they started doing some heat training sessions just in May and June before coming to us, so that they could actually get some legitimate heat exposure. So that when they came to us, it was just even amplifying some of those heat exposures.
How much of an advantage is coming from a hotter climate? Like, how much of an advantage is it going to be for Latin American countries and African countries this summer versus England and Germany and the Northern European countries?
It all depends on the person, like fitness level, if they really truly had no heat exposures beforehand, but it could definitely be like 3 to 5% difference in performance. No question, with proper preparation. And that would be body cooling, heat acclimatization, hydration stuff. If you do all of those things appropriately, it would at least be a 5% difference in performance, which obviously at this level could mean the difference between like third place and 30th place. Now, keep in mind, some of the hot places in the world, they're coming from their winter, though, in the southern hemisphere.
Yeah.
So even though it might normally be hot, like for instance, like Australia and New Zealand could be brutally hot in their summer, but they're coming from their winter. But like you said, also in Europe pro soccer, it's really a mixed bag. Like Premier Soccer in England, they're going to really almost see not much heat at all during their pro games. But you look at La Liga and Serie A, they'll see heat in Italy and Spain during their games and their training. So it also depends where these people are coming from, because even though the country's coming from somewhere, at least say the top 20, 25 teams in the world, all of their players are playing professionally, most of them in Europe. So we got to think of really where have they been the last 6 months, not where their country of origin is.
Is there any difference in prepping for or dealing with dry heat versus humidity? Because you mentioned Portugal can be pretty dry sometimes, but going to somewhere like Brazil, it's like a completely different kind of heat, right? And the US has LA, which is dry heat, and Miami, which is humidity.
Yeah, even in Brazil, it was similar to America, because you may remember there was a couple cities, one of them being Manaus, that was like in the middle of the rainforest. They built a city from scratch, like 50 years ago in the middle of the rainforest, which was very different than some of the other cities that did not see that kind of humidity. So similar, I think, to America. But yeah, it's different. I mean, there's a little less preparation, to be honest, that has to be done when you're in dry heat because your body temperature doesn't rise as fast. You still get benefits. It's more exaggerated when you're in both heat and humidity at the same time. Now, you could have a great trifecta in like Mexico City or was it either Guadalajara or Monterrey? One of the others, one of them's near the coast and one of them's in another one's at altitude. But they could have the trifecta. I mean, you could have humidity, altitude, and heat at the same time. So that'll be an additional stress.
What are the altitude risks?
Yeah, I mean, thankfully, these altitudes are not like super excessive. But I mean, you could just go back and look at the 1968 Olympics when Mexico City hosted the Summer Olympics. I mean, like 10K, 5K marathon, it's going to be very hard to run your normal best time at altitude in a situation like that. Those would be good comparisons to the stress of soccer when someone's running around for 90 minutes or potentially 120 minutes, where there is some slight advantages where we had really good like long jump performances and other things because altitude actually can help in certain very brief athletic activities like a long jump, triple jump, high jump situation, or probably even like a javelin or discus throw. But anyway, yeah, so it's just an additional stress, more strain on the cardiovascular system. But it's another thing you can get ready for. Elite runners, they live in altitude tents at night. They sleep in altitude tents. Like almost every elite runner in the world probably has an altitude tent over their bed because they want to sleep in it to get all the benefits of altitude, but they don't want to train in altitude because the quality of their workout will suffer. You still train sometimes high, but you don't want to do all of your hard workouts at altitude.
How helpful are things like wearable technologies?
Yeah, I mean, we're in an explosive time right now in terms of wearable tech. So it's very exciting times. I kind of wish I was a new PhD grad now, like all of my students that I supervise, because I think the next 30 years be profoundly more exciting in sports science world than the last 30 years. Some of the big items are being addressed. So we've often said the two big holy grail items in the heat hydration space is one is real-time assessment of hydration status. Okay, we haven't quite gotten that one done yet, but we have made a lot of progress on a couple ancillary areas. One is assessing your sweat rate with a wearable, assessing sweat electrolyte concentrations, and monitoring fluid consumption. So those are three parts of the fourth item would be real-time assessment of hydration status. And why that's a little different is you can know your sweat rate during an activity. Picture like a construction worker doing a 10-hour shift. It's very helpful to know you're losing a liter or 2 liters per hour because then you know how much fluid you need to replace. But we don't know what a person's hydration status was before they started. So just knowing your sweat rate doesn't tell you your hydration status. So people are on the verge of that. I think in the next 3 to 5 years, we'll probably even be able to have that item solved as well. We have elite athletes fly to us at Corey Stringer Institute here at UConn from around the world and have for the last 15 years because we do something unique called a whole body washdown, where it's one of the, I think, 3 labs in the world where we measure the sweat concentrations from all of the sweat in your body during exercise in the heat, so we can dial in exactly the amount of fluid you need and the exact amount of electrolytes you need in your rehydration beverage, because everyone's so different. Another big advancement in wearable tech is real-time assessment of body temperature. So that could be super helpful. Picture like during heat acclimatization, in the weeks leading up to it, you can monitor people's body temperature really easily. In the next 5 years, I'm positive like sports scientists, athletic trainers will have iPads and they'll know their athlete's body temperature and they're going to know their athlete's hydration status just by looking at their iPad because of the wearable that the athletes are wearing. But we have some of that now. We have some general predictors of body temperature, and I already told you we have really good ideas of sweat losses and sweat electrolyte concentrations. You are, I'm sure, well aware, and your listeners are, there's wearables related to GPS. So we understand speed, intensity, distance covered, heart rate stuff. And that speed intensity stuff is really important so we understand load of these athletes. Because during some of the group round games, if a country's doing well, they don't want their starters to play the full 90 minutes, right? If you're doing well and you're going to be advancing and you got to play 3 games later in a knockout stage game, you do not want people playing 3 group round games of 90 minutes. If possible. Obviously, if you need to advance, you do it. So there's just a lot of information that can be gathered during training and during the games that you can use to optimize performance and safety.
We've talked about the players, but what about the fans? So even with these air-conditioned stadiums, there's going to be a lot of outside time. There's going to be security lines. There's going to be waiting for trains, things like that. How can fans keep themselves safe?
Yeah, I mean, the easiest things to do for them is obviously minimizing the amount of time outside. Get themselves a good, well, I don't know what's allowed in every stadium, so please take this with a grain of salt for when we look into this, but like a good stainless steel water bottle that stays cold and that can be refilled throughout the day for hydration, and like a cooling towel, like having something that they could wet occasionally and put over their head or neck to help them stay cool. And then whenever time's allowed to be in shade instead of sun, when that's humanly possible, wearing hats, wearing bucket-style hats that cover as much of their head and face as possible, not just baseball caps. Wear light-colored clothing, because like you said, from the moment that they leave their car or their hotel, like they might be outside for 90 minutes or 2 hours before they enter the game, even in a climate-controlled facility, and then they might be walking into the Miami Stadium, and they might be on the side that's going to have sun the whole game, if it's a day game, so definitely need to think about it because obviously massively varied fitness levels, medical conditions that people will face as fans.
How important is shade as a tactic to kind of reduce risk? I know that for players, it's not really possible to just aim for the shade, but for fans who can soak up some cool down time in the shade, how effective is that?
Very effective. It's massive. About 20% of the thermal load comes from the radiant heat of the sun. So you're eliminating a decent portion of that. So I would tell people during half times, even pregame, like as spectators, if the stadium's hot or their specific seat is really in a bad situation, take times to go out undercover to have shade. Super helpful. And like I said, at other times, if they're waiting to get into certain venues or waiting for a train, if there's ever times they could be in shade, bus stops or anything like that. If they're tailgating, they're going to just organically, just whole city streets are going to become tailgating spots. When possible, be in the shade. I mean, the key thing, the biggest protector in the heat is your fitness level. Now, when someone's standing there at a game, they can't change their fitness level, right? That's going to take many weeks or months beforehand. So that's relevant for like a laborer, right? Or a soldier. You can change your fitness level, which changes your ability to tolerate heat. But what are the things a spectator or a worker or a volunteer can do? What are the things under their control? They can try to either get into shade or create shade for themselves with a big, huge hat on, right? They can have light colored clothing. They can make sure they're staying hydrated through the course of the day. I'm praying that people are allowed to bring water bottles in, but I honestly don't know the answer to that. So it'd be fun to maybe look that up. Every city and every competition is very, very different. Like I was just at the World Championships for track and field in Tokyo in the fall, and we were allowed to bring backpacks in. I could have a ton of water bottles, but I know in America the backpacks were not going to be allowed.
I think maybe transparent 1 liter water bottles is the rule.
Okay.
If I'm getting that right.
So there goes my idea of the stainless steel water bottles that'll stay cold because, as you know, the transparent ones will be like 100-degree water after a little while.
Yeah.
So hopefully there'll at least be water sources. I know people have been trying hard at a lot of events to make sure you don't have to buy $10 waters because that just discourages people from drinking sometimes. And when it's so, a lot of stadiums have tried to have some water fountains that are publicly accessible. So we'll see what transpires there.
Especially when you're drinking the beer too, and you need to alternate water with beer, right?
Yeah, that makes it much worse. If obviously many people are going to be having massive consumption of alcohol pre-night, pre-game, during the game, post-game. So,
but genuinely, does that worsen risks for heat stroke?
Oh, no question. Yes, because it's not helping in terms of your hydration, and it dramatically alters your cognitive ability to make good decisions for yourself. Seeking shade instead of sun, making sure you're staying hydrated, making all the good decisions are just much less likely to happen if you're intoxicated.
In there.
Yeah.
Doug, last thing, you mentioned on the phone when we chatted last that you have your own plans of watching some games. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, my wife and I, a couple years ago, bought an RV travel trailer to pull behind our Jeep Wrangler, and we're going to be touring the country, be on the road for like 35 days, visiting games in every city but one or two. We haven't decided for sure, but like 9 or 10 cities we're going to be in games for.
The hot ones. Are you avoiding the hot ones?
No, to be honest, yeah, we are avoiding Miami, but it's not honestly due to the heat. It was honestly another 20 hours of driving from Atlanta down and then back up again. Just giving the timing of the games. The Philly game we're going to after Atlanta was close. But yeah, we're super excited. We're huge fans. We went to the 2015 Women's World Cup in Canada. Went to 4 games there. Got to see the semifinals in Montreal when America played. We went to the 2019 Women's World Cup in Europe and saw the final game when America won against the Netherlands in France. And so we just really enjoy the sport, and we enjoy like high-level sports competitions.
Well, that sounds like the most classic American way to watch the American World Cup, the RV. So great. Well, Doug, thanks so much for joining. Really appreciate it.
Oh, of course. What an opportunity. I appreciate the opportunity and being invited.